Tell me about your game studio and what type of video games do you make?
BlackHawkGames was founded in 2018. The first game we designed was a game named Plant Studios. Since then, our game studio has focused on making FPS games or survival games that involve many multiplayer modes. Recently, we have launched a new game named Necrosis Reconfigured, which can be considered a more serious game entry for our studio.
Do you work alone or with your own team?
Honestly, it all depends on what game we're talking about here. Necrosis is an indie game made by only me, but the Wastelands, my other game, the survival one, I made with a good friend who goes by Mazzara. He assisted with making the zombie models, the trees, and some scripts for our game.
What is the hardest part of making video games?
That all depends on what type of game we develop. If the game is single player, you don't have to worry about keeping servers active and about too many updates. But single player games also require a lot of level design, and for indie devs, that could be a challenge. Now, in general, I think the hardest part of making games is modeling the game objects and creating your level designs. It can be quite hard.
What type of video games do you enjoy playing?
I like most FPS games, normally multiplayer ones, and some survival horror type games, like Resident Evil 2 Remake. Sometimes I play Minecraft too.
Out of all the video games you have developed over the years, which have you cared about the most?
The game I care about the most is Necrosis Reconfigured, because I have fixed several bugs via updates, added new things such as weapons, maps, redesigned UI, scripts. I've also spent a lot of time maintaining the servers. That's the worst part, because it costs a lot of money in my country, and the free plan is kind of bad for our players in the game.
Are you looking for any help for your game projects like voice talent actors, modelers, programmers, etc.?
Actually, all I need is one thumbnail creator to create new images for the games that I will launch in the future, and one good modeler that can create good weapon animations, scene objects, and player models.
What has been the easiest thing about making your video games?
Normally, the easiest part when I'm creating my games is rigging new player models that come to the game. I've been using Mixamo to rig them. It's easy and simple. It also has the added benefit of optimizing the games.
For how long have you been making video games for?
I've been developing games since April 2018, when one friend told me that it would be a good idea if I created games.
Do you have a favorite video game console?
I don't have a favorite console, but if I launch Necrosis and Wastelands to console, my preference will be Xbox One and PS4. I'm just not a fan of inputting controllers to the Nintendo Switch.
Besides video games, what type of other stuff do you like to do?
I usually like to hang out with my friends, play some soccer with them, go to the shopping center with friends or the family.
What are some new projects you're currently working on?
I normally like to keep a non-launched game as a secret, but since it's a special occasion, why not? My planned 2020 games to be launched: Storm Legends, a second RPG, Zelda-inspired adventure game where you play as Kennedy, a villager who is a devoted subject of Zalur, the king of the Ice Mountains. Your objective is to slay all the enemy soldiers threatening the villagers near the mountains. The story is still in development, so expect a lot of things to change, but here's one thing that could be planned: Necrosis Mobile.
Tell us a little bit about Necrosis.
Necrosis is an FPS series which focuses on fast-paced battles with intense gunfights and lots of fun. It all started on September 2018 when the first Necrosis was launched, but unfortunately I lost the project. Then on April 2019, I launched Necrosis Remake, the game that brought a lot of attention to my studio. After that, I launched the next two Necrosis entries, Necrosis Chapter 2, October 2019, and Necrosis Reconfigured, May of 2020. Chapter 2 came with new guns, resources, and weapons. Necrosis Reconfigured innovated a lot of things, like it started with the community maker, community of people who could send their maps to the game and play it, and the highly anticipated single-player game mode, which is not launched yet.
Tell me about your other game, Wastelands.
The Wastelands is a survival game that turned BlackHawkGames into a serious game studio. It got featured 2 times in Game Jolt, 17K views and 2,600 downloads right now. The objective of the game is to survive a ship crash on an island that has a variety of exotic animals with a limited amount of resources. You'll need to discover all the mysteries that the island has to offer.
Can you please name all the video games you've made over the years?
Necrosis Reconfigured, which launched May of 2020, an FPS game. The Wastelands, which launched February 2020, a survival game. Necrosis Chapter 2, which launched on October 2019, an FPS game. And Blackhawk's tower defense game launched on August 2019. It's a tower defense game. Necrosis Remake, which launched April 2019. It's another FPS game. And we also have Necrosis, which launched September of 2018, another FPS game.
Can we find your games on Steam?
Unfortunately, not at the moment, but we do plan to add Necrosis Reconfigured and the Wastelands to Steam in their final build form. So keep an eye out for that, everybody.
Where can we find your games?
You can find all my games on GameJolt.com. If you're trying to find Blackhawk's tower defense game, it got removed from listings, so I'm terribly sorry if you were looking for it.
Who is your favorite video game company?
I would have to say Ubisoft is my favorite game company because they created the legendary game series Far Cry. I'm also a huge fan of Far Cry 5, as well as Ubisoft's Rainbow Six Siege 2, another lovely game.
Why did you decide to make the game with Unity Engine?
My story on the Unity engine began when I made the first Necrosis. Back then I thought it would be easier to use Unity, and it's been working great ever since. I would also like to add that I like using this engine because of the script language. It utilizes C#.
Would you ever try Unreal Engine?
I tried to make a game on the Unreal Engine several times, and it never went well. So I prefer to stay with Unity. I think it's easier for me, and I'm just familiar with it.
Is making a multiplayer game more difficult compared to a single-player offline game?
In my opinion, it depends on the size of the level. If the multiplayer game has one small level design and the single player one has one huge level design, the single player is more difficult. But if the level design on both is equal, the multiplayer one is more difficult because you have to maintain servers or else there's no multiplayer for the fans to enjoy.
What are some things do you want to add to your games but you can't do currently?
For the Wastelands, our survival game, I would love to add a multiplayer mode and different save game states, and of course more resources in order to flesh out the game experience. For Necrosis, I want to add better servers to the game that can run lower than 30 ping, and of course keep a stable 128 tick.
Where can we follow your game projects?
Actually, you can follow all my game projects on GameJolt.com and my Discord server. I plan to improve the way my games can be discovered by opening an Instagram account and launching on Steam eventually.
Is there anything you want to say to the people listening in who are interested in your games?
If you guys liked any of my games, make sure to check out my Discord server and my GameJolt account. I post updates and news for my games there on a regular basis.